In episode 15 of The War and Truth, we explored how there's no scientific reason to believe that anyone is born gay. Many scientists have tried to prove that homosexuality is inborn, and they've done this by looking at brains and genetics and epigenetics, but there's simply no scientific evidence that anyone is born gay. What we did discover, however, and this was backed up by testimonies of ex-gay people, is that homosexuality is caused by psychological scarring and emotional trauma in developmental years. In other words, if someone is gay, it normally signifies that they have a broken relationship with their parents somehow, or they've experienced abuse, or they were bullied, or they just had some kind of unnatural early sexual experience. A couple of examples we looked at were a young boy who grows up without a father, so he craves that missing masculine love in his life. When he reaches puberty, that craving for missing masculine love then becomes sexualized, and he goes into the homosexual lifestyle. Another example was a young girl who grows up with an abusive father, so she comes to fear and hate masculinity, and therefore when she reaches puberty, she is then repelled from men and is drawn towards lesbianism. Those are just a couple of examples we looked at. If you want to watch the full episode, I'll link it down below in this video, and I think you can also link in the corners now, so maybe up here somewhere or up here. What I thought it'd be interesting to do now, though, is to see if we can prove this point still further by looking at the lives of famous gay people. I know from personal experience that every gay person I've ever met fits this hypothesis. Every gay person that I've ever met, I think, so okay, so you didn't have a dad, or you had some kind of broken relationship with your parents, or you were abused in some way, and then as time passes it turns out that yeah, there's some very obvious psychological or emotional trauma that explains this brokenness in their sexuality. So yeah, I thought it'd be interesting just to prove this point further by looking at the lives of famous gay people. Lots of them have done autobiographies and interviews, so we can look into their past and search for these things. I should say, however, that I'm not going to stack the deck in any way. I'm not going to deliberately highlight people that I know have been abused. These are just literally the first 10 gay people that come into my mind. Alright, so probably the most famous lesbian I can think of is Ellen DeGeneres. I didn't know this until now, but in 2005, Ellen did an interview with Allure magazine where she revealed that as a teenager, after her parents divorced, she was sexually molested by her mother's third husband. She said the man made her lie down while he groped her, and she also recalls how the stepfather tried to break down her bedroom door at night. She said, "I had to kick out a window and escape and sleep in a hospital all night long." So Ellen clearly fits this hypothesis. Her parents' broken relationship, and then sexual abuse at the hands of men to the point that she was scared to even be at home. Emotionally traumatic and psychologically scarring, check and check. The second gay person that comes to mind now is Milo Yiannopoulos, and he's actually been quite open about the sexual abuse that he experienced as a child.
I'm a gay man and a child abuse victim. Between the ages of 13 and 16, two men touched me in ways they should not have.
Milo has even strongly hinted that he knows that it was those abusive experiences that led to his homosexuality.
So the gay lobby started a big lie. They kind of came up with this gay gene thing. It's like, wait a minute. What if we're like black people? What if we were born this way? And we've got no way to change it. That would make everybody who doesn't like us into the most massive bigots. Let's go with that. So they invented Born This Way, which is now a cultural trope, even in, a couple of years ago in Lady Gaga's songs. But it's a lie, it's not true. The science suggests that it's a mixture of nature and nurture. Steven Pinker thinks it's mostly nurture. In my own experience, it's certainly mostly nurture.
Milo recognises that he wasn't born that way, and he seems to understand that it was the traumatic experiences of his teenage years that caused brokenness in the area of his sexuality. The third person that comes to mind here is Elton John, and a quick search reveals that he once described his relationship with his father as pure hate. Elton's parents divorced when he was 15 years old, and when his father, Stanley Dwight, remarried, Elton John said that he was completely rejected in favour of his father's second family. The scars from that rejection have stayed with him for his entire life. Calling this his darkest secret, he said, "I thought I didn't deserve to be loved, cared for, or present in the world." He goes on to say that it was his father's rejection that led him to drink, drugs and eating disorders, and that he spent his whole life trying to compensate for the lack of fatherly love. He said, "I've spent my life trying to prove to my father that I was a success. He's been dead for years and I'm still trying to prove the point. It stays with you." So again, Elton John fits the hypothesis. He ached for the masculine love that he didn't receive from his father, and so has gone looking for male acceptance in homosexuality instead. Another outspoken gay man is George Takei, and he recently admitted to Howard Stern that his first sexual experience was when an older teen molested him when he was just 13 years old at a summer camp.
Yeah, it was a mixed summer camp.
Was it? Were there other Asians there, or were you the only other Asian gentleman?
There were other Asians there.
How old were you at the time?
I was 13. I was very young.
Yes.
And
13 is young,
and
yes.
he was an older teenager. He was a camp counselor.
19, would you say?
He was about 18 or 19, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was experienced.
Yes.
And we each had cabins, and he was the counselor in my cabin.
He could tell that you were a gay man? Was it evident at 13?
No, it wasn't.
No.
But
were you sure at that point you were gay?
No, I was not sure.
So again, another gay man that fits the theory. Let's think of another woman now to balance it out a little. Let's go for Rosie O'Donnell. Again, a very quick search reveals that Rosie O'Donnell's mother died when she was 10 years old, leaving her to be raised by an abusive and emotionally distant father. She is admittedly kind of guarded about the abuse and doesn't go into great detail, but she does describe some of the things he did as unforgivable. So clearly something quite terrible was going on.
How did your father deal with it in reality?
You know, not very well. He had his own issues and demons. He had a very tough childhood, an alcoholic, abusive father, and never really got the help that I think every person needs when they have lived through that as a child. The worst thing that can happen to anyone is to become what you loathe, and I think that he had a lot of problems to deal with in his own life, never mind being faced with raising these 5 small children.
Now that you've had 4 kids yourself, have you been able to look back on him in a more favourable light, given the enormity of what was suddenly thrust upon him?
In some ways I do, but there was some, there are some unforgivable things, I think, that as a child, the statute of limitations, I think, has to wear off, right? You get to be 50 years old, you can't still be angry at what your father did in 1970. You have to work it out yourself and then find a place for it in your own life and not rehash it.
So O'Donnell again fits the theory. Not only did she miss her mother's love and may have gone looking for women to fill the vacuum there, but she also had an abusive childhood experience with men. The next one that comes to mind is Ricky Martin. When Ricky Martin was 12 years old, he became part of a Puerto Rican boy band called Menudo. The band was put together by a man called Edgardo Diaz, and a few years ago it came to light that Diaz sexually abused Martin. Band member Roy Rosello says, "They had a party at a mansion in Puerto Rico, and when I arrived, someone told me to go see Edgardo in his room. I never told my family. I was ashamed. At the time, Edgardo was very powerful. He had many lawyers. At that party, when I arrived to the room, I saw Ricky Martin dressed like a girl. I called Robbie and he came in and punched Edgardo while I ran out of there. I got to the street and fell to the ground, praying for a car to hit me." So again, Ricky Martin fits this hypothesis as a victim of child abuse. The next one I'm going to go with is Graham Norton, the BBC talk show host. And again, here's someone with a very unhappy childhood. He says that his Protestant upbringing in Catholic Ireland left him friendless and lonely. He also explains that he was bullied by the other boys, and his abiding memory of his childhood years is just wanting to get away from Ireland. So the bullying, the rejection from the other boys, the isolation and the loneliness could be the emotional trauma that we're looking for. Admittedly, he is a little less specific and he doesn't go into great detail, but it's clear that he did have some emotionally traumatic experiences. Tom Daley, the Olympic diver, first came to the public's attention when he was just 11 years old. As a child prodigy, the BBC followed his progress for a documentary called Tom Daley, the Diver and His Dad. And as the title suggests, it highlights the fact that his father and him had such a close relationship that they were practically inseparable.
In 2005, Tom Daley became the youngest diver in Britain to qualify for the Commonwealth Games. He was just 11 years old. His dad, Rob, had been by his side for every training session.
He supports me all the way, and if I didn't have his support system, I wouldn't be here now, because I wouldn't want to carry on without his support.
However, when Daley was just turning 17, his dad actually died from cancer, aged just 40 years old. Clearly this left a gaping hole in his life, because not long afterwards, he announced that he was gay and was in a relationship with American producer Dustin Lance Black, who at that time was, you guessed it, 40 years old, the exact same age that his dad was when he died, and 20 years older than Tom. It seems clear that Tom is just trying to fill the void that his father left behind. The next one I can think of is Ruby Rose. I've never actually seen her in anything, but she fills the gossip columns in the newspaper, so I am at least somewhat aware of her. A quick look into her background reveals that she had a very dark childhood. She grew up without a father from the age of 2, and she was sexually abused as a kid. She said, "My past involved incestuous sexual abuse and a turbulent home life, which was not always safe." She also says how that made her depressive and suicidal even by the age of 12 years old. So again, Ruby Rose easily fits the hypothesis. The final one that comes to mind for this list is Neil Patrick Harris. Again, this is someone I don't think I've ever seen in anything. I've never watched How I Met Your Mother, so I don't really know him, but his name just keeps popping up, so I decided to do a search for him. And this is actually the trickiest one of the lot, because there's almost nothing out there at all about his childhood. The only thing that I could find was from his autobiography, where he says that he was working with Burt Reynolds as a teenager, and he says, as a joke at the end of one take, Burt leans over and kisses you square on the mouth. The crew think this is very funny, but it makes you uncomfortable, and it will ultimately turn out gay. Burt Reynolds' kiss makes you gay. So I guess that goes down under the heading of unnatural early sexual experience, but yeah, this one's slightly more inconclusive. But time after time after time, we're seeing the common thread here. If you're gay, it's probably because of emotional and psychological trauma. I'll just remind you of what Joseph Sayambra said after he left the gay lifestyle. He said, "Although I witnessed a genuine affection between gay men, it was akin to the instant camaraderie which indelibly links all horror survivors. For this was the characteristic I witnessed in every same-sex couple, a bond of suffering enkindled by their shared memories of a childhood gone wrong, failed parents, bullied boys, and lonely nights spent crying out for love." This quick look at some celebrities is just backing up what's already obvious, that homosexuality is an outworking of inner brokenness. And since the evidence is just so clear on this, then the fact is that we shouldn't be affirming that brokenness or encouraging it or indeed celebrating it. Instead, we should be helping people to find healing from it. We should help them to be set free from their homosexuality. That's ultimately the most loving thing that we can do. And that is why Christians indeed are simply on the right side in this.